Greetings, booktubers, and welcome back to Grammaticus Books. Welcome to what's going to be a very interesting discussion here today on the channel, because today we are going to embark upon the Trail of the Bloodstained God. The Bloodstained God, a story written by Robert E. Howard back in the 1930s that went through a long and sordid publication history, and we're going to go through all of it here today, all of its iterations. We're going to go through the whole down and dirty of the Trail of the Bloodstained God. Now, how I'm going to structure the video here today is we're going to go through the publication history, and then after that, I'm going to compare the Robert E. Howard version of the story to a heavily edited version that was done by another individual who shall remain nameless at this point in the video, but I think is probably pretty obvious. If you're a Robert E. Howard connoisseur and fan, you'll probably know who I'm talking about. And then I'm going to tell you which one that I think is the better version. And at this point in the video, I may commit blasphemy. I might commit an act of black heresy here on the channel, but you just have to stay tuned to find out. And then to finish up the video, what I'm going to do is there was a comic book adaptation of The Trail of the Bloodstained God that is absolutely phenomenal. And I'm going to transition over to an overhead camera, and we're going to do a page-by-page flip through of that fantastic comic book version. And that's the video here today. I'll put time hacks to everything down below in the timeline. So if you want to skip to a certain part of the video, you can go ahead and do that very easily. But that's it. Let's get on with it. Let's start up on the Trail of the Bloodstained God. Trail of the Bloodstained God was a short story that was written by Robert E. Howard in the 1930s, and it's a Kirby O'Donnell story. Kirby O'Donnell's one of his desert adventurers, very similar to El Borak, aka Francis Xavier Gordon. In fact, the two are almost identical. Their descriptions are virtually identical, and their backgrounds and their stories are very, very similar. But Robert E. Howard, he wrote a total of 3 Kirby O'Donnell stories during his lifetime, 2 of which were published and 1 of which was unpublished. And the unpublished version was The Trail of the Bloodstained God. That is, by all accounts, the original working title that Robert E. Howard put on that story, The Trail of the Bloodstained God, and it does not make it to a publisher. It gets rejected. And there's a reason for that, and I'll go into that a little bit later here in the video. So 1930s, he writes The Trail of the Bloodstained God as a complete and full fleshed out story, and then he passes away before it can be published. You have 19 intervening years then, a lapse of 19 years, until the meddler-in-chief, aka Sprague DeCamp, finds the finished story, and then he edits it heavily, turns it into a Conan story, and publishes it in the Tales of Conan in 1955, and that book that was put out by Gnome Press. Now, what Sprague DeCamp does is he takes this story, he removes Kirby O'Donnell as the main character, he inserts Conan the Barbarian, he then changes the setting from Afghanistan to the Hyborian world, sets the story in the Zamoran borderlands, and then at the end of the story, he adds in a supernatural element. He also edits paragraphs throughout the story heavily. So the story sees its light of day 19 years after the death of Robert E. Howard, but in a heavily edited format. And then you have an intervening period of 14 years to when it gets republished in the Lancer and Ace paperbacks in issue number 2, Conan the Cimmerian, and again, it's The Bloodstained God, because Sprague DeCamp changes the working title from The Trail of the Bloodstained God to simply The Bloodstained God, and alters the title as well. After that, in 1976, 40 years after the death of Robert E. Howard, you finally get an unedited version, I should say, of the original Kirby O'Donnell story. The original Kirby O'Donnell story, as written by Robert E. Howard, finally sees the light of day 4 decades later in a book titled The Swords of Sharazar. But for some inexplicable reason, they altered the title to the story, and they changed the original working title from The Trail of the Bloodstained God to The Curse of the Crimson God. So technically speaking, you still don't have a completely unedited version of the tale here in 1976. Then 2 years later, you get the next iteration when it gets converted and adapted into comic book form by Roy Thomas. Roy Thomas, the legendary editor and writer of Marvel Comics, and it gets put into a Marvel Super Special in 1978 of Savage Sword of Conan, and it's written by Roy Thomas. He does the adaptation, and it's illustrated by John Buscema and Tony DeZuniga, and it is fabulous. And this is the comic book that we're going to go through page by page here at the end of the video. But the story isn't done. The Trail of the Bloodstained God has not yet reached its end, because there is another version that comes out. Then in the year 2010, 74 years, almost 3/4 of a century after the death of Robert E. Howard, you finally get the publication of the original Kirby O'Donnell story by Robert E. Howard with the original title. And the Del Rey version of this book here, El Borak and Other Desert Adventurers, which collects all of the El Borak stories, which are fantastic, and all of the Kirby O'Donnell stories, including the Trail of the Bloodstained God. And it renames it back to its original title and publishes it in its entirety, unedited, as written by Robert E. Howard. And this is where the Trail of the Bloodstained God ends, here in the year 2010 with this fantastic Del Rey edition, which you can still get, by the way, off of Amazon for relatively cheap, about $20. So that is the Trail of the Bloodstained God. It's a very interesting story. When I started reading the Kirby O'Donnell out of the Del Rey version, it got me on the idea of following this trail to its end and seeing all the changes that happened over the intervening decades, almost 3/4 of a century of time and additions and edits. So that brings us to the question, which version is best? Is the original Kirby O'Donnell version the best version? Or is it the heavily edited version by the chief meddler himself, L. Sprague DeCamp? And the short answer to that question is L. Sprague DeCamp wrote the better story. Now, before you go down into the comments section and start to light me up, let me make my case, because I can demonstrate, I can put together a demonstrable case, an objectively demonstrable case as to why the L. Sprague DeCamp version is actually better than that Robert E. Howard version. First off is the writing, and I know this seems like a strange place to start because L. Sprague DeCamp is nowhere near as accomplished or polished or as a quality of a writer as Robert E. Howard was. Robert E. Howard was a legendary writer, particularly when it came to sword and sorcery and action novels and stories. However, in this version here by Robert E. Howard, the Kirby O'Donnell version, his writing is not the best. And this is why it never got published, in my opinion. I think he submitted this to the various pulp magazines for publication. They read his writing, and the writing is rough in spots. And what L. Sprague DeCamp does is he sees this and he polishes up those really rough edges. You've got a diamond in the rough here by Robert E. Howard, and L. Sprague DeCamp comes in and he takes the rough edges off of that diamond and he polishes it up and he makes it shine a little better. He is admittedly standing upon the shoulders of a giant, Robert E. Howard, which without that framework, without that fantastic framework of a story, he never would have been able to come up on his own. But he does improve the writing. And I'm going to read to you guys a passage out of the original Kirby O'Donnell, and then I'm going to read that same passage out of L. Sprague DeCamp's version so you can see how he actually improved the writing of Robert E. Howard, as blasphemous as that may sound. So I'm going to read this paragraph. This is the point where Kirby O'Donnell has broken into a room that is in the city of thieves in Afghanistan in order to save a man who's being tortured, and a fight is ensuing. Here's the paragraph. The man called Jalad, which means executioner, parried O'Donnell's slash and cut back. O'Donnell avoided the swipe with a shift that would have shamed the leap of a starving panther, and the same movement brought him within reach of Red Turban, who was sneaking in with his knife. Red Turban yelped and leaped back, so narrowly avoiding O'Donnell's kinjal that the lean blade slit his silken vest and the skin beneath. He tripped over a stool and fell sprawling, but before O'Donnell could follow up his advantage, Jalad was towering over him, raining blows with his saber. There was power as well as skill in the tall man's arm, and for an instant, O'Donnell was on the defensive. So that's the original version. Now here is L. Sprague DeCamp's version. The man called Jalad parried Conan's slash and cut back. Conan avoided the swipe with a shift that would have shamed the leap of a starving panther, and the same movement brought him within reach of Red Turban's knife. The knife shot out. The point struck Conan's side but failed to pierce the shirt of black ringmail. Red Turban leaped back, so narrowly avoiding Conan's knife that the lean blade slit his silken vest and the skin beneath. He tripped over a stool and fell sprawling. But before Conan could follow up his advantage, Jalad was pressing him, raining blows with his saber. And it's better. It's got about a third less of the words that Robert E. Howard put in there. And Robert E. Howard puts in words that are frankly, it's a little dumbfounding why he decided to add in the explanation of the translation of the name Jalad in the middle of a battle. And then he puts in these extra clauses in these sentences that just break it up and make the action stilting in its description here by Robert E. Howard in a very un-Robert E. Howard-like way. And then L. Sprague DeCamp comes in and he cleans it up. He takes out all that superfluous language. He makes it leaner. He makes it more direct and to the point, and it flows better. And this type of editing happens over and over throughout the short story here, The Trail of the Bloodstained God, and it is an improvement to the story. The other thing that L. Sprague DeCamp does that improves the story is he removes Kirby O'Donnell as the main character, and he inserts Conan the Barbarian, who is a much more interesting character than Kirby O'Donnell. And L. Sprague DeCamp, for once in his life, actually gets the character of Conan right. He gets him as a thief, a rogue, and a mercenary, because he is in here for mercenary reasons. He's trying to save this person who's being tortured, but he's not doing it for altruistic reasons. He's doing it for mercenary-like reasons. And he gets Conan right, and Conan is a better character than Kirby O'Donnell. And then the last thing that he does correctly that actually improves the story, in this version of it here, he adds in a supernatural ending, which is desperately needed to end the story here and give it a better punch. Because the ending by Robert E. Howard, it's very abrupt. It doesn't have that supernatural ending to it. And it comes up as feeling very cut off and not that well finished, not that well executed at the end. And when L. Sprague DeCamp goes in and he adds the supernatural aspect to it on top of Robert E. Howard's ending that he put into it, it gives it that oomph that the story needs, and it makes it a better story. And as much as it pains me to say it, for this instance and this instance alone, L. Sprague DeCamp actually improved upon Robert E. Howard's work from that original Kirby O'Donnell story. Now, if you want to, you can go down in the comments section and light me up and tell me how I'm wrong. But one thing here, I am not saying that L. Sprague DeCamp is a better writer than Robert E. Howard. He is not. He can't hold Robert E. Howard's jockstrap. He just got lucky on this one. L. Sprague DeCamp was at his best while Robert E. Howard was at his worst. And he's still working from a magnificent framework of a story that Robert E. Howard came up with that L. Sprague DeCamp could never have pulled out of his imagination and put down on the paper. So that is The Trail of the Bloodstained God. That is the heresy of The Trail of the Bloodstained God. At this point, I'm going to transition over to the overhead camera, and we're going to go through that fantastic Savage Sword of Conan by Roy Thomas and John Buscema. Okay, here we are with the overhead cam with Marvel Super Special number 9 from 1978, Savage Sword of Conan, The Trail of the Bloodstained God. Just an absolute fabulous issue of Savage Sword of Conan, and one of only 2 full-color Savage Swords of Conan that I'm aware of. And this one is also a little bit unusual because the cover is done by John Buscema. Now, John Buscema typically did the interior work on it. He did all the pencils on it, and he rarely did the covers. And this cover is absolutely magnificent. Just a great take on Conan here. A little bit of a different take on Conan by John Buscema, particularly with the face, when you're looking at the design of the face. But then you have just the absolutely iconic John Buscema take on Red Sonja over here on the right. And what a fantastic cover. So let's open it up. You get a front piece here, again by John Buscema. That's wonderful. You've got your credits page. Editor and writer Roy Thomas, artist John Buscema, Tony DeZuniga, who probably did the inks and the colors, and then Howard Chaykin. Howard Chaykin does the artwork for a Red Sonja story that comes after Trail of the Bloodstained God. Next, you get a double-page spread of the Hyborian Age, a map of the Hyborian Age in full color, which is absolutely wonderful. Just fantastic. Look how bright those colors are that jump off the page. And you don't typically get that here these days. You don't get these bright colors. And then you have page 1 here of The Trail of the Bloodstained God, using the original title by Robert E. Howard, the working title that he had. And it's Conan in the city of Orengen and Zamora, trying to hunt down a band of thieves led by a Prince Arshak, who have stolen the treasure map from him that shows the trail of the bloodstained god, shows the trail to lead to the bloodstained god. And it says, "It is dark as the pit in the stinking alley down which Conan of Cimmeria gropes on a quest as blind as the darkness around him, when a sharp pain-edged cry smites his ears." And what a great line there by Roy Thomas. That's Roy Thomas writing that in his adaptation. And then this fabulous stinking alley here in Orengen, as rendered here by John Buscema and Tony De Zuniga. So Conan follows the cry to a house where a man, a Kazakian hillman, who he needs as an ally to get through the hills to the temple of the bloodstained god, is being tortured by a red-turbaned man directing his band of cutthroats to drop burning coals on his chest. And Conan bursts in, which you think at first might be for altruistic reasons, but he actually just needs a ally amongst the Kazakian hillmen in order to get to the temple. He crashes in, and of course you have the fight that ensues. And John Buscema is just such a master of the human form, of human anatomy, and of posing the human form. He understands it completely, and that lets him make just great panels here. This is a great arrangement on a panel where you have, this is Arshak the Prince, who unbeknownst to Conan at this point is the guy who has actually stolen his map. You have him perfectly framed among his cutthroats as he's directing him in there. And then you get this great action sequence with this great posing here by John Buscema. So Conan frees the Kazakian hillman, sends him out into the night, and then he pursues, or I should say he flees out after him, but as he's jumping the low wall, he gets hit in the head with a stool thrown by one of the ruffians, and it knocks him unconscious for a number of hours until he's awoken by another thief that's been trailing him, who's been trailing Conan as he's going after the people who stole his map, because he's also after the bloodstained god, and his name is Sasan. It says, "Be at ease, Conan of Cimmeria, I am your friend. Who in Crom's name are you? Your friend. Call me Sasan." And Sasan actually is a slight variation that DeCamp did off of the original name of this character from the Kirby O'Donnell story, which was Hassan. So for some reason, DeCamp felt the need to change that front letter. So they figure out that they're on the same trail. He lets Conan know that unbeknownst to him, he was actually fighting the people he had gone looking for in the city of Orengen, the people who had stolen the map from him, which obviously irks Conan. But at this point, the two thieves decide to team up. And Conan knows that as soon as it's opportune for Sasan won't hesitate to put a knife in his back if it's in his favor. But he needs Sasan because they need an extra blade to go and confront Arshak and all of the rogues that he has in order to get the bloodstained god. So they gather up their horses, they head out of the gate, and they head into the hills. And the first thing they do is they run into a Kazakian hillman who they think is just there in order to exact a toll on travelers. But he's actually there for an ambush because their tortured man has made it back to them, and now the Kazakians are out for blood. And so they ambush Sasan and Conan. Sasan and Conan fight their way out. They get on Conan's horse and they run smack into another ambush. They run in right to the people who they're pursuing. They run into Prince Arshak, who has his map of the trail of the bloodstained god, and he takes down their other horse. So they go out of the frying pan into the fire. They get behind cover and then they yell up to Prince Arshak that there's a horde of Kazakians on their trail and they'd better let them in because they're going to slit all their throats. And then Prince Arshak replies, "Get in quickly. Time enough to divide the idol if we get out of this alive." And then Sasan and Conan join them amongst the hills and get ready for the next onslaught. And then you have a great battle scene here that ensues between the Kazakian hillmen and this group of three different types of rogues. You've got Arshak and all of his group. You've got Sasan, who's out for himself, and Conan, who's out for himself, who are now all working together. There's no honor among thieves, but they'll band together when it's in their own self-interest of preservation. And just wonderful combat again by John Buscema with this fantastic panel right here. I mean, John Buscema just really knew how to pose people for the most dramatic effect, and it's what makes him one of the greatest artists of all time, in my opinion. He understood human anatomy, he understood composition, and he understood how to get the most dramatic poses out of his figures. especially in this environment for sword and sorcery. So at the end of the fight, they fight off the Kazakian hillman, and Arshak is mortally wounded, the prince who has the map that he took from Conan. And as he's lying dying with his back up against a rock, he says the following: "Born in a palace and dying behind a rock wall, no matter it is fate, there is a curse on the treasure. All men who rode on the trail of the blood-stained god have died." Including Arshak, it seems, says Conan. And then the one surviving member of Arshak's crew is Xyrus, and they decide together, the three of them, to team up in this uneasy alliance of three thieves, all going to try to find this idol and then try to figure out how to split it, knowing that at some point, someone is going to betray the rest of the members of the group. They continue on through the night, and they find the temple containing the bloodstained god, and you get this wonderful panel here by John Buscema. And I think the color just makes this one stand out greatly. You get the bronze door in the entrance here to the temple with the rock face, with this great trail with the mist down off the side of it, with the three horsemen coming up the trail. They arrive at the gate, and Sasan's greed gets the better of him. He jumps off his horse and he goes running up to the bronze gates, and Xyrus shouts a warning at him. "Greedy fool, Asterio left a warning on the margin of the map." And Sasan replies back, "Bah, you're an old woman, Xyrus. See, I simply pushed the right ornament, and already the door moves under my hands. And then it crushes him like a bug, with the blood coming out from underneath the door. So it's one less knife to worry about for Conan getting stabbed in his back. And then Conan notices the hinges here that let the door fall out, and then the chain that starts to bring it back up. And this actually fixes a plot hole in the original story by Robert E. Howard, the Kirby O'Donnell story, because there's no explanation as to how the door could have crushed people with Astoria, where he was mentioning this in the margins of his map, and how the door got back up. So it actually fixes that minor plot hole. They get inside and they behold the bloodstained god. It's a giant golden idol encrusted with rubies. And as they're here, Conan hears Xyrus pull his sword, and that saves his life. But in the original story by Robert E. Howard and in the story by DeCamp, DeCamp keeps this part, Conan hears Xyrus mutter under his breath that it's too much treasure to share with a lout of a barbarian. And he hears him mutter that, and that's what gives him the warning to duck and saves his life right before the sword cuts through the air where his head was. And of course, the two start to duel. And you know how a swordplay fight is going to end here between Xyrus and Conan. It can end only one way. And that's with Xyrus with a broken neck and dead in front of the blood-stained idol. So with both of the thieves that he came in with out of the way, Conan now sits there. He's got his thumb on his chin, pondering, how am I going to get this giant idol out of here? And I think at this point, I think it would have been more prudent just to take the king's ransom and rubies that are on this thing and have done with trying to haul this gigantic idol out of here. But as he's musing how he's going to get the idol out, the Kazakian hillmen have returned. The head of the Kazakian hillman, Karaspa, and his one unwounded man from the fight in the rocks with Conan and the rest of the rogues. And he's got bows drawn on Conan. So he instructs his one man to disarm Conan. But the man who's left, the one unwounded man, is actually the man who Conan saved back in the City of Thieves in Orengen, and he refuses to obey orders, and Karaspa has to kill him. And after Karaspa kills him and he falls into the chasm, your supernatural element comes into play, and the bloodstained god takes one giant step down off of his pedestal and starts to stride towards Karaspa, who desperately yells, "Stay back," to no avail, as his arrows strike the idol to no avail as well. And the idol grabs him, picks him up, and then throws him into the pit himself. And then he's coming for Conan. So at this point, Conan picks up a giant brazier and uses it to knock the head off of the golden idol. But that doesn't slow it down in the least. And Conan realizes he's still going to have to deal with this gigantic ruby-encrusted golden idol, this Leviathan that's coming at him. And as he's contemplating this, he realizes that the priests weren't the ones who threw the victims, the sacrificial victims, into this chasm here back when this was an active temple, that the god himself made those human sacrifices, and that Conan seems destined to be the next to die. And that's a great little line, and that's an original line there from Robert E. Howard out of the original Kirby story. But Conan comes to him first before the idol can get him, and he knocks him, the giant golden statue, along with all the rubies, down into the chasm, and they're gone. But he doesn't worry about it too much. He's like, there are other treasures out there. The world is rife with treasures to plunder. And he's got his pick of horses, and he takes a horse and rides off. Easy come, easy go, which is very much in the vein of Conan the Barbarian. Very much a Robert E. Howard take on Conan the Barbarian, and a great ending to this story here, The Bloodstained God. So that's The Trail of the Bloodstained God. It's a wonderful story here in Savage Sword of Conan. It's one of the better stories, wonderfully colored here by Tony De Zuniga to make it just really stand out. And I'm going to show you one more page in here. And this is the opening page to the second story, which is Day of the Red Judgment, which is a Red Sonja story by Howard Chaykin. And just look at the red hues on here. Fantastic stuff. And Howard Chaykin is the perfect pick to illustrate Red Sonja. He has just an excellent style in order to illustrate Red Sonja, the female warrior. But look at the red hues here. Back in 1978, you had a 4-color process that by blending these 4 colors in different mixes and different qualities, they could produce 64 different shades of colors. And you could get colors that really pop. Like you've got this crisp, bright yellow. You've got this nice light blue that just stands out. And then you've got the crimson red here in Red Sonja and the blending of the red over here. These days, with the modern coloring processes, you can get basically an unlimited amount of variation in the color, but they cannot, for economic purposes, for economic reasons, afford to do these just crisp, bright colors. And it just doesn't look as good as these old comics from back in the 1970s. And I just wanted to show you guys that cover page there to the Red Sonja Day of Red Judgment and talk about the coloring process a little bit. But that's it. That is The Trail of the Bloodstained God. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have read both of these stories, the Kirby O'Donnell and the L. Sprague DeCamp version, let me know which version you like best and why. If you've only read the L. Sprague DeCamp version, did you think it was a good story? I actually think that this is one of the better ones by L. Sprague DeCamp. It holds up really well. And again, because he's standing on the shoulders of a giant, Robert E. Howard. But with that, I'm going to say take care, be safe, and I will catch you guys next time.